All right, I promised you guys this was going to be informal, so I'm going to do my best here. I appreciate all you guys staying. Right, it's been a little bit of a rough day. It's been long, but a couple of the things I wanted to do was to kind of tie things together for you, or at least help to tie things together. Every time Joe speaks, I don't even know where he went. Every time Joe speaks, I learn something new. And the reason is that when you listen to Joe, when you listen to Bruce, Richard, first time I've heard it, I learned a ton, right? When you start listening to these people, what happens is you can't get hung up in the details, right? Because you can call them and get the details. What you want to do is you want to think of what is their thought process, right? How do they think about things, right? Richard is talking about the intersection. We put this together 2016, 15 maybe, right? So the idea is we want to look at sustained growth, right? That was our premise, right? And for those of you in finance, it's an important topic, right? Sustained growth, right? Growing is not enough. Productivity, not enough. Sustained. And in order to get sustained growth, and I remember giving this presentation in Medellin, right, in Colombia. And in Medellin, what they were doing is they were stealing from here, paying here, and saying, look, we're growing over here. No, you're not. You're stealing from Peter to pay Paul. That doesn't work. That's not sustainable. And so you start going into this whole thing. So I can appreciate, right, when Bruce says, hey, you know, finance is important. I'm going to actually take it one step further and say finance is critical. It's not important. It's critical. You have to understand. Now, as I was sort of coming out of school and what have you, they told me I have to learn how to talk to my accountant. Why? Because he's the guy that can steal from you. It's a good enough reason. It's a good enough reason to actually appreciate the fact that you have finance as part of this, right? Injustice. Why is it even an issue? It shouldn't even be an issue, but it is. So we have to fix it. So one of the things that Joe said, thanks for coming back, appreciate it, is be humble, right? We're not going to solve the climate change. What I do is we measure things, right? You saw Nancy's presentation, right? She had 4 things, right? Our 4 things are slightly different than hers, but it's the same thing. We measure, we identify, we mitigate, and then in my world, you know, I grew up in New York, right? We don't do this nice thing. We enforce, right? You have to have enforcement, right? And once you have enforcement, now you can start stepping towards the solution. So the key to this sort of diagram is that everything is interlinked. You gotta have policy. Can't do it without policy. We missed enforcement. I thought you were looking at this. I'm not looking at enforcement.
The reason we did this, it looks like a soccer ball.
Yeah.
People will pick it up.
Yeah. And so going back to the questions you guys were asking, what do engineers do? We're methodical. We're process driven, right? So we're going to walk you through exactly how we're going to do this. And this is what's important, is that the engineering side of it is not that we're engineers and we can solve problems. Sure, we do that. But science and engineering has a common language. That's what ISTEC was built on. It's common language of science. There's no misunderstanding. The only other place there's common language is in sports, right? Everybody knows what a soccer field is. Everybody knows who a referee is. And everybody wants to kill a referee, right? That's okay. But you have to have a common language. Now you can build. So let me tell you about what we do, right? SensorComm Technologies. We are in the climate change business. We're going to help climate change, but we take a very methodical view of this, right? You've heard we're putting up satellites to look for super polluters, right? The SOBs that are pushing methane into the air, right? They're killing our crops, they're killing this, they're killing that, killing the other thing. Super polluters are only 8% of the problem. I'm flying a satellite over a super polluter, and then I go away. If I'm a super polluter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my thing off as the satellite goes over, and then I turn it back on. Easy solution. Doesn't solve the problem, but it's an easy solution. So what do? We say, okay, let's take a look at something else, right? The wildly difficult problem, micropolluters. It's a micropolluter. Something small that pollutes. Abandoned oil wells, right? We dig, and then all of a sudden it's like, doesn't make any money anymore. Done, not mine, not my problem. Micropolluter. The biggest micropolluter? How many of you have cars? This 20 years ago, this number would have been much bigger. But vehicles are one of the biggest micropolluters. We talk about catalytic converters, we fix this, we fix that. So what we do at SensorComm is we took a sensor and we stuck it in a tailpipe. And it allows us to identify who the polluters are. Now, in that, it turns out it's a 27% of the problem. Anything north of 20, you got a good shot at actually having an impact. Anything under 20 is, big deal. So the impact is important because there's a lot of things you can do. And unless you have an impact, there's no point. Let me take you back to the Peace Engineering side. There were a couple of things that everybody missed, right? Or that was stated, but they weren't emphasized. The big thing in Peace Engineering is understanding the unintended consequences, right? Facebook, great. I'm connecting with all my high school friends. It's been a couple of years since we graduated high school. So we're connecting, we're all connected now. What's the unintended consequences? For those of you that use cars, not necessarily own one, but let's say you use a car, what's the unintended consequence? I can get from here to there faster. Productivity, huge, right? Growth, I need productivity. Without productivity, I don't have growth. I'm much more productive. So once I'm more productive, what happens? Now we go into the fact that I'm polluting the environment. We use fertilizer, food security, right? You've heard that term before, right? We use fertilizer. Well, for every ton of fertilizer I make, I produce 1 ton of CO2. I'll feed you, but I'm killing you. Let's fix it. Got to fix it. And so if you think about how we think, right, as a company, right, as an organization, as me, right, is that I like to look at a problem. I don't like the easy problems, right? Anybody can do that, right? We take on micropolluters, right? It's more fun that way. We want to monitor cars. We think there's an 80-20 rule. Why do we think there's an 80-20 rule? Because there's always an 80-20 rule. This is no exception. An 80-20 rule says that 20% of the vehicles are producing 80% of the pollution. Let's find the 20%. Identification. We had a conversation recently with a group that says, you know all this whole net zero stuff. Yeah, net zero. We're going to be net zero by 2025. We're going to be zero by 2030, right? Pick a day. Doesn't matter, right? Ramiro, like 70 months, 80 months. I need the extra thing. 80 months. I'm going to be net zero. What are you measuring in order to get you to net zero? Net zero means I do this, and then I add them. If I'm not measuring, what am I adding? I don't have a number. Oh, well, I'm estimating. No. We have the technology, IoT. Our systems are Internet of Things based. They're wireless. You put them in a car and you drive. Well, when I put them in a car and drive, wait a minute, I know where the car is. I know where the pollution is. If I were to take a garbage truck that drives around once a day, in our case, it was tow trucks in California, right? Put them on there, all of a sudden, tow truck comes to a stop. Why does a tow truck come to a stop? Because there's traffic. Why is there traffic? Because it's Los Angeles. There's always traffic, right? So the traffic now happens to be over Compton. And so you can see he didn't use the term, I will, it's a disadvantaged community, right? The disadvantaged community has the highest amount of pollution, has the highest healthcare cost, right? And then all of a sudden, now we're on Richard's camp of we have significant injustice and legitimate, but we have data. We have data supporting the claim. Oh, I don't feel well is because I had breakfast at the frontier. No way, right? There is no correlation. So until you have data, until you can measure, you don't have anything. And that's the key. And that's why you need engineering. That's how you generate peace. You have numbers, you have dollars, you have the entire whole peace thing coming in. And now what you do is you do it on a justice, on a justice platform. And now you can make a difference. The problem is, it's up to you guys. Because we've done our thing. Good or bad, we did our thing. We're trying to help. But it's in your hands. You guys are going to be the ones that generate the policies. Be careful of the unintended consequences, right? Very, very, very important. Be careful about the sort of, we call them blinders, right? You know, the myopic vision where you're only looking, I'm going to do this. Well, you're doing all of this because you did that. Be careful. Think globally, act locally, right? Pretty sweet. And with that, I will let you guys go to lunch. So, thank you very much. Yes.
Question from the chat is, yes, sustained growth equals sustainable.
It's supposed to. But the issue is that you have to sort of walk before you run. So you do sustained growth and then you try to do sustainable growth thereafter. Now, there are arguments that we should be doing sustainable growth from the beginning because and have it designed in, but right now we have to stop the bleeding. So if you can get any sustained growth, take it, and then we'll fix it down the line because that's what we do. As engineers, of course. Great question, by the way. Thank you.
How do we apply this method or this technology to a large company? Because I think that sometimes that I see those type of technologies, they like apply to a consumer level. And like, I don't think that we are the greatest polluters in the world.
We actually are looking at it's a great question, right? It's a great statement because you can't put it in every consumer because it doesn't make any sense. Too much effort. And why, my grandmother used to drive her car on Sundays. She really doesn't pollute. But FedEx, Amazon, UPS, the garbage trucks, just examples, right? They drive a lot of miles. So our systems are deployed at Los Angeles Metropolitan Authority, right? LA Metro. That's a big organization that cares about this. And so what happens is, and of course, they get operational efficiencies out of it, right? We can save fuel, we can, monitor the vehicles. If something goes down with the vehicle, we can predict, right? So there's a lot of, so I do have a trench coat that says, we do blockchain. Oh, we do IoT, we do analytics, right? Machine learning, AI, right? All that stuff is in our system. Right? None of that matters, really, right? Because it has to solve a problem. But you're absolutely right. It's the companies that you want to go into. And they get cost savings, they pay for the system. And that's how you get it.
So you have to pass the barrier that they want to have this type of technology applied.
So
Oh,
because
sorry.
we're tied at the hip, I have to interject with a footnote that what Kamil says is, if you have a fleet of trucks outfitted with the sensor, wait, nobody buys trucks anymore. They lease them. The leasing company sells the lease to a private equity partnership. Can package that set of leases for all these 150 trucks as an investment in climate change mitigation because of the data that's coming off the sensor. Right? So now you have a 5-year lease where you've mitigated that much carbon quantifiably, and you got a different lease rate. You pay less in rental costs for the trucks. So yes, finance is up on the side, but
But
then
it's
we
not.
come in.
But it's not.
But we're not.
Bruce, thank you.
Sorry.
And it's the asset extension, right? So by measuring and making sure that the vehicle's okay, you can actually extend the life of the asset. So insurance companies, right? So we want to be, there's a Kelly Blue Book here. So the vision is that Kelly Blue Book would have a pollution number in it. So that's how you would do it. Ron, please.
Quick question about accumulative effect, how you measure and how you inform the policy makers about that.
So the policymakers are the policymakers, right? It's easier to make a policy when you have data, right? At least we prefer policy when it's backed with data, right? A lot of times policies roll around because somebody licks their finger and says the wind is blowing from here, right? Those aren't effective policies, but policies that have data tied to them, and if you have enough data, right? And that's how you would, I think. I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
Well, I was just making an example.
Yeah.
The air quality board here now, because at one time they were like giving permits states on each industry.
Mhm.
But then we're now looking at the cumulative effect, adding all those emissions.
Correct.
So part of it is like, you know, with this data, how are you using accumulative,
Yeah.
using the accumulative effect, how you report that accumulative.
Absolutely. So one of the things that's important, I didn't mean to bash satellites in this sort of monitoring kind of a thing. The idea is that you have to collaborate, right? So there is no one solution, right? We are one solution of many that have to be brought together. The key to the one thing is the accumulation of the data and the aggregator of the data, right? So we recently wrote a white paper that says that what you want is you want a nonprofit organization that's the data accumulators, right? That accumulates it. And in our paper, we chose ISTAC as being the accumulator of the data. And then what you have the analytics of the data. And that's where the policies are going to be driven, is once you can accumulate and aggregate the data, right? Because we do one thing on the cars, somebody else does the refineries, somebody else does the air quality measuring just at the thing, right? With the little detectors. Right, and we're looking at actually monitoring inside of homes, right, in new builds, right? How much pollution do you have in your home from your stovetop? For example, if there's a leak, where do we find it? Where is it? Right, there's 300,000 kilometers of pipeline in the US, 300,000 miles. There's a leak. Good luck. Good luck. Unless it's enough to see from a satellite, you got nothing. So you have to integrate these technologies together in order to form policies.